Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining, Your Excellency. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Can you hear us okay? If
Oh, yeah.
you just yeah.
Hello, Kahlissee. Hello. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. I know it's been a really, really busy time for you, and I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to come and speak to us. Can you hear us okay?
Perfectly well.
Thanks. So I'd like to introduce my co-host. This is Patrick Henningson, a good friend of mine and a very well-respected journalist. Patrick, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words very quickly.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us for this space, and hopefully we'll have time to get through some really insightful questions, and hopefully we'll be able to enlighten and educate our audience as well on some important issues. But thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I look forward to the conversation.
So if it's okay with you, Your Excellency, I know that I'd like you to speak a little bit about recent events in Jenin as we go through, but I can start off with a question first, and then I would like to very much touch on what's happening in present day. So one of the first questions is that 120 prominent Israeli law professors validated global findings that Israel is practicing apartheid, 120 of them. And every single major human rights group has concluded that Israel practices apartheid. With that in mind, when do you think the governments across the world are going to finally acknowledge that this is, in fact, apartheid?
Well, the same thing is happening again, like in South Africa, apartheid South Africa. Countries like the US and the UK really lagged behind, shamefully, actually. They were very late in supporting the anti-apartheid movement. So we are seeing a very similar sort of trajectory here. And we see the same tactics being employed by Israel here and there. These policies are unfolding right in front of us. Actually, as we speak, there is a proposed bill in the US Congress to deny that Israel practices any sort of apartheid. When in fact, as you just started with your question, the very simple definition of apartheid is when you set up and manage a system of racial domination. And Israel has been practicing that racial domination since its inception. And as you said, there are very well documented, very well researched reports by the most prominent human rights organizations in the US, in the UK, and in Israel itself. And of course, numerous human rights reports by Palestinian organizations. So we have not much hope with governments, but we need to do a lot of work with the public, and this is where things can actually be much more rewarding. Again, like the experience of the anti-apartheid movement during the South Africa situation. Polls show that a majority of Britons and a growing minority of Americans, actually, and the majority of Democrats in America are more sympathetic with the Palestinian cause. Such public perception shifts are slow, indeed, very slow, to have an impact, immediate impact. But when they do, and when they really accumulate, they can have a very crucial and decisive impact. I think the US and the British politicians know very well in their hearts that Israel does practice the crime of apartheid. But what prevents them is very narrow personal calculation, political calculation. These politicians are not naive, and we encounter many of them. They know that these human rights organizations have damning reports, have done so after thorough and long, exhaustive research. So they know all that. It's not a lack of knowledge. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, they are very well known, and Beit Salem in Israel, etc. So, but politicians won't change unless they are pressured. That's the lesson of history, and that's why we depend and rely in our strategy bottom-up pressure and change. It was the British, after all, public who started the campaign against apartheid South Africa, despite the country, their government's policies. I mean, and that's why we need the people of the UK to stand up and repeat what they did in the and we're working with them towards that direction. Only then we will see a change, Kahlissee.
Do you see, I just want to ask a very quick follow-up question, and then I will hand over to Patrick. But do you see an improvement since you have been in the UK as ambassador? Do you see the momentum growing? I personally feel, when I look at other countries across the world, that the UK has a very strong pro-Palestinian movement. But how do you see it?
It's mixed. I mean, on the one hand, I do experience firsthand the growing public awareness, support, sympathy, solidarity with the Palestinian cause. That's evident not only in opinion polls, but in key major sort of moments like 2021 and the attacks on Sheikh Jarrah and the eviction of people from their homes at the Aqsa and then the aggression on Gaza. We've seen the streets of London literally full of tens of thousands. A quarter of a million came to support Palestine at the time. And we see many of these examples almost on a regular basis. So on the one hand, and of course, opinion polls are very clear that the majority of the British public are pro-justice, pro-peace, pro-international law, pro-Palestine. But on the other hand, and that's why I said it's mixed, there is a growing gap between that and the government here. And the gap is getting bigger and bigger. While the public is going in the direction of justice, in the direction of awareness and solidarity, the government is going in the other direction. The government is going out of its way to actually shield Israel from any sort of accountability, including very recently a proposed anti-boycott bill that would give even the Israeli illegal settlements another layer of protection against any sort of ethical disinvestment from these illegal entities. So that's why our main task is to bridge that gap between the public and the government, and that requires more work with the public, and it requires some organizational work to pressure the government in the right direction.
On that note of the BDS issue, Your Excellency, what is your response to this? Is unprecedented, the recent anti-BDS legislation by the UK government. This is sort of new. We're getting into new territory here politically. What is your response, and what are your thoughts on this development?
This is a very serious development, and it shows that there is a lot of transactional politics here, and it does not really follow or be consistent with international law and the UK responsibility under the international rules-based order. We have to remember that the UK has a historic responsibility on the whole situation, the plight of the Palestinian people, because it was the Balfour project that promised our land without consulting us and has directly led to where we are today. And the last 75 years of Nakba, and I choose my words carefully, it's 75 years of not since Nakba, and because the Nakba continues. What happened a couple of weeks in Jenin, the Jenin refugee camp, are refugees already that were ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1947-49, and now Israel is after them in their own refugee camp. So the UK has such a very unique responsibility, moral, legal, historic. Also, the UK holds a permanent seat in the Security Council, which makes its responsibility towards the international system much more than other countries. And the UK is a founder of the post-World War II order. In fact, we did commemorate the 75th year of Nakba here, and we chose the room where the first General Assembly was convened, here in London, the Westminster Central Hall. And the first UN Secretary General was British. So to be a founder of such a global order and then to undermine this very order is something that is really mind-boggling. And therefore, it can only be explained by a one-sided conversation, by transactional politics that are increasing here. And as much as it is disheartening to see attempts by the government here to do so, to undermine the long-standing policy, because what they're proposing is very dangerous and very serious. It would end decades-long, very clear differentiation between Israel and Israel's expansion, i.e. the occupied territories. And that is in direct contradiction with UN Security Council resolutions that the UK drafted and, of course, voted for, such as UN Security Council Resolution 2334. In addition to the fact that by providing a second layer of protection to the Israeli settlements and their products at this very particular point in time, with such a government that are fanatics and, including ministers who are convicted criminals according to Israeli law, Israeli courts, like Ben-Gvir. Why the government here is doing that, it's beyond our comprehension. It's incomprehensible, really. Except that, it's that one-sided conversation that only looks at the issue from the prism of an ultra right-wing agenda. And this is very regrettable because, in my opinion, and I was a student here in the UK many years ago in the late 90s, and I remember the UK was and wanted to be a global player, has a very sort of good relations with the US, with Europe, with the Middle East, with Asia, with the rest of the world, Africa. But what is happening now is simply completely regrettable, and a reversal of all of those who thought and believed that the UK would keep the checks and balances and be a penholder of international relations and international law. So it's very unfortunate. However, there is serious pushback, and you may have followed the debate in the parliament when this bill was first proposed in the second reading. And there were some very strong voices there from all parties, cross parties, including from the Conservative Party, who completely opposed this bill on a matter of principle, and also opposed it for singling Israel out, because they were saying the whole idea of this bill is to fight anti-Semitism, but when you single Israel out, you actually are going in that direction. So we'll work with all our partners to make sure that such is defeated.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Roman, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Kahlissee. Good evening, Your Excellency. So my question is, the US and some Israeli government officials are insisting that they're still pursuing a two-state solution. And there is also a talk by some politicians of a one-state solution. So where do you see this issue going forward?
Well, allow me first, my friend, to remind ourselves that the two-state solution was never a Palestinian demand. It was a Palestinian concession. We agreed to pursue a two-state outcome because we wanted to simply ally ourselves with the international community and the international consensus that was being forged in the 70s and the 80s. We thought that was not a perfect solution, but we go for what is possible rather than what is desirable. And before that, the PLO platform, the PLO is the Palestine Liberation Organization, headed at the time by Yasser Arafat. The PLO platform was a one democratic state, a state for all of its citizens. So the PLO did abandon that platform and adopted the two-state solution under the assumption that once you do that, you ally yourself with key international actors, and then the rest is details, i.e., it will be the international community that will deliver the two-state solution. That was the idea. And soon after, actually, Oslo was signed, and it was meant to deliver that outcome, the two-state solution. It didn't happen. And from the beginning, I don't believe Israel really intended to allow for a sovereign, independent state of Palestine on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, and resolving the issue of refugees in a just and fair way in accordance with international resolutions. I don't think that was the intention. And from the first day of signing Oslo, the first brick of settlements that were built in the occupied territory should have really brought a huge row and a serious backlash from the international community. It didn't happen. So as we stand today, things are very serious, and many people think that the prospects of reaching a two-state solution is very dim and very slim because of the settlements and the settlement infrastructure. I mean, if you go to the West Bank, it will hit you that it's almost like a Swiss cheese nut, Swiss cheese like. But I don't think the question now should be about the one or two state solution. Really, this is a luxury, a privilege, if I may say, to discuss what solution we have to have now. We're dealing with people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. It's a much more serious than thinking about the final destination. The question should be about how to end the state of impunity and the lack of accountability, and then that has been lasting for 75 years, and how to bring about a peaceful, legal, non-violent pressure by the international community to change the dynamics. As long as we have this status quo, there will be neither a one or two state outcome. There will be nothing. We still remain officially committed to the two-state solution. And I personally believe that we, the Palestinian people, are should be able to enjoy our full political, collective, national rights. You know, I believe we are a nation, and we are a very ancient people, and we have our land. And we have to liberate our land, and we must build our sovereign state, and that state must be there to protect its citizens and to provide for its citizens. That is a very important step in our history. Yet I'm not busy thinking about that. I am busy thinking about accountability and ending impunity. I'm busy thinking about the means, not the goals. We are busy trying to change the power dynamics so a solution can emerge that is just and fair, regardless of that the final contours of that solution.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Doc, would you like to go ahead and ask your question, please?
Yes, certainly. Ambassador, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm an American, a conservative American, born and raised in California, and still a little bit confused listening to our media as to exactly what's happening. But I am curious. Some Americans still insist that the Abraham Accords were a groundbreaking diplomatic agreement that has brought some peace to the Middle East. What's your response to that understanding?
Well, the Abraham Accords brought peace, as you just said, to the Middle East. Is in itself a very contradictory statement, and it tells you all you need to know. I mean, peace is done between two conflicting parties, between two warring parties, and I don't think Israel has been at war with Emirates or Bahrain. To tell you the truth, the fact that the achievement of the Abraham Accords has been widely overestimated and portrayed as the way you did it just showed how much Israel wants to convince everybody in a very elusive way that the issue is not Palestine, the issue is not the Palestinians. The issue we had is with the Emiratis and now it's solved, or with the Moroccans and now it's solved. It's almost abracadabra. You know, it's a business of magicians, actually. And Netanyahu is very well known for these tricks. Israel knows that the only peace agreement that matters and will carry any kind of weight is a just and sustainable peace with us, the Palestinian people. Israel knows very well that its issue is with us. But this is, in a way, exporting the problem because the current government, and in my opinion, many of the previous governments in Israel, never really intended to quit their occupation to allow for a real and just peace to be achieved and to allow for a Palestinian state. And therefore, they are doing all that, you know, peace is struck here, peace is struck there. We don't believe this is the case. And those who did the Abraham Accords argued that they're doing this also to help ease the situation, stop the illegalities. But look, since it has been signed, the attacks against the Palestinian people by Israel has really multiplied. The settlement expansion has rocketed. The severe violations in Jerusalem is all over. I'm sure it's very well documented. So those who argued that this will calm down Israel have been proven absolutely wrong. It has given Israel another incentive to proceed in that very wrong direction.
And
By the way, last thing, I'm sorry. We as an Arab world have one plan, and that plan was reaffirmed in the Arab Summit only a couple of months ago in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, where the Arab Peace Initiative still is on the offer. It's the only plan on the offer. That's what represents all the Arab countries, which is a plan that gives Israel full normalization, not only with Arab countries, but with Muslim countries. You're talking about 57 countries. Should Israel quit its occupation, ends occupation, should peace prevail. And we believe this is the right sequence because normalization should be an incentive for peace, not a substitute of peace.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate that answer.
Yeah, Your Excellency, another question from an American perspective. So as an American, I am fully aware and understand that the United States provides unconditional military and financial support to Israel. In addition, we're also aware that the British defense contractors are also supplying weapons to the IDF, and we realize that these are impacting people on the ground. What is the overall impact of this military support from these countries in the occupied territories, and what ideas do you think there are to perhaps, if it's a negative impact, to reverse this issue going forward in the future?
Well, thank you for this question. It's a very important question, and I can tell you straightforwardly the impact is extremely severe, and there are responsibilities on these countries to make sure that any provision or exports of arms are in line with international law and with their own obligations. So the British weapons and other machineries, like it's not just weapons, even machineries, equipments like bulldozers and diggers are in fact used by Israel in the occupied territories to commit war crimes. Some of this used to commit, to build settlements, which is a very well-defined war crime according to international law. The illegal colonial settlements, the transfer of population. For instance, the UK's JCB, which is a big construction company, the JCB diggers and bulldozers are used to build settlements until now, and we document them all the time. So the main problem, however, is that this unconditional part of the West / Israel relationship when it comes to arms and arms dealing. For instance, the US and UK can sell weapons and equipments to anyone they like, unless these weapons or these equipments used to break international law and international human rights law. This is the responsibilities of these countries. They agreed responsibilities. These are countries that are contracting states in the international system. So this is not a demand, it's an obligation upon them to make sure that their weapons do not end up violating international law. And I don't need to say Israel's law breaking is very well documented, not by us only, but by the United Nations and by various institutions that Israel does break the law on a regular basis. So the U.S. and the numbers are striking. I mean, the U.S. subsidizes the Israeli domestic arms industry, the arms industry in Israel itself, with about 800 million a year. Every year, the U.S. pays 800 for domestic production of arms in Israel. And in total, my friend, answering your question, Israel receives over 3 billion every year in military financing, more than all other countries in the world combined. So if you put the whole world combined, Israel receives military assistance more than the rest of the world. So the US finances about 16% of Israel's total annual defense budget. Actually, I shouldn't have said defense, I should have said offense budget. Israel, moreover, is a huge arms exporter, as you know. They export a lot of arms, and uniquely among countries who receive US military financing still, while it is a net exporter, and is allowed to use some of this money to develop its own weapons, of course, and weaponry industry. And the US and Israel sometimes have very sensitive relationship because Israel does export these weapons sometimes that originally produced via American aid and support. They end up sending them to places that the US does not agree with or does not want to. So the UK role is much smaller, but rising as well, much smaller than the US in this. Despite a 2014 pledge by then Prime Minister David Cameron to review arms exports license, including to Israel, he did make that pledge. Sales still have risen from 67 million between 2011 to 2015 between the UK and Israel. I'm talking arms deals here, to 387 million between 2016 to 2020. So the same 4-year period. You can compare the huge jump in terms of trade between the UK and Israel. So we really look forward and towards the UK and the US to act ethically and in line with their own obligations, responsibilities, by clearly stipulating that their weapons and equipments not be used in occupied territory. It's as simple as that. And we work with many partners here, not to end up in the bare bodies of our children and families. And that is our right, and that is their obligation. They could this, by the way, would play a crucial role in ending the illegalities. It's a major question. It's a major side that you've asked about, my friend. And I believe that we should work very seriously, and all of us, to make sure that arms trade are in line with international provisions and global responsibilities. And this is part of the impunity that I started by talking about. And this is part of having the cake and eat it too, because if you violate all these international provisions, if you are a lawbreaker all the time, and then all what happens is you get more armed deals and more trade deals, and you get a carrot and a bigger carrot, so you have no incentive to change. In fact, this is a license, a green light, if you may, to continue on the same detrimental path. And just recently, by the way, F-16s and 35s, are really provided by the US. Israel will buy 25 F-35 aircraft from the United States. The Israeli government just announced on Sunday, this Sunday, in a deal that increases Israel's arsenal of this most sophisticated jet by 50%. Can you imagine? In one go, 50%. And guess how Israel uses these fighters? And do I need to send you footages and images of how they use these fighters in the neighborhoods of Gaza and here and there? So it is absolutely regrettable and unfortunate that a country like this, established on a constitution that's clear, that hosts the headquarters of the international system, that is the United Nations, would not even consider to commit weaponry to the provisions of international law. It is really, in my opinion, this is a soft spot, and we need to focus on it, and we need to work hard so these countries actually ally themselves with their own responsibility.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador. And I want to remind everybody in the space, if you could, we're very privileged to have this opportunity to speak with His Excellency, the Ambassador for the Palestine Mission in the UK. If you can retweet this space on your profiles, that would be great. We get more people in for the second half of this question and answer session. But I'll hand it over to Kahlissee.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, Fahad. Thanks for joining. Would you like to go ahead with your question, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ambassador. I'm a Muslim American. My take on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a lot different than my other Americans, who also happen to be, sort of wise and smart. So my question to you is, are there any initiatives to help overcome the problem of misinformation and propaganda in the Western and mainstream media regarding this Palestinian issue?
Well, you've really asked a very relevant question because, in my opinion, media has played a key role in the mess we are in. I refer to here to mainstream media. We have been having serious issues with the way media has portrayed our situation, the misinformation and propaganda. But let me say this, my friend, we try as much as possible to meet bias and misrepresentation and misinformation with facts and accuracy. And this is not easy. It's not easy. We are challenged all the time. One of the biggest problems we encounter is that journalists and opinion formers, influencers, if you may, often don't understand the historical context well enough to reach the conclusions they reach. I urge all of them, and whenever I am with them, I urge them to dig deeper. That's their responsibility. They're journalists. Their one obligation is to portray, is to convey, is to report the truth and be neutral and understand the history of Palestine thoroughly. If you're a journalist and you are really covering that part, you need to thoroughly understand the context and the history and the dynamics, and then draw your own conclusions. But it is very important that this point is not today, and that you don't make it sound like the focus is on the react rather than the act of aggression, the act of colonization, the act of occupation, the act of besiegement. Also, the task of journalists in occupied territory has grown ever more dangerous. Speaking about journalism, and from my very dear friend and close friend, whom I miss dearly, Shireen Abu Aqli, who was killed in Jenin, as you know, last year, to Yasser Murtaja in Gaza. All these are very prominent journalists who are being targets to the Israeli occupation. So the whole journalism, on the one hand, there is such lack of clarity in the international side, and our journalists are being very targeted. Just to tell you how important media is, because in the end, it's about the narrative and the war of words. And I started by saying how significant it is to build a global movement that will end this injustice. Governments will not. And therefore, here comes the significance, the strategic significance of media, of information, and of sure that our narrative is presented in the way it should. And also have to admit we are suffering from a chronic problem with some, not all, but some Western mainstream media. A serious problem, and I have encountered that throughout my years as a diplomat, and before that as an official and an activist. I mean, always the starting point is a losing point for you as a Palestinian. They put you in a box where you're a loser, whatever happens. And this is a trick that has been tried and has been with us for a long time, for 75 years. because then they focus on the consequences rather than the origin of all this. They don't want to discuss the root cause of this. And therefore, by the way, it covers the whole Israeli atrocities. And in many cases, if you follow the interviews that were done with me during the attacks on Jenin a couple of weeks ago, some of these questions almost come from the playbook of the Israeli occupation army, the talking points. It's unbelievable that serious global mainstream media would not do their homework and will just, read out whatever comes from the spokesman of the Israeli army. But I think there are some changes. Things have begun to change slowly but surely. And the key reason for this change is, I think, the social media. Look at this, what we're doing together now on Twitter Space. This didn't exist a few years ago. So we have new venues, new platforms, and we have new active citizens, especially Palestinian youngsters, who are much better now in engaging the world, in taking videos, in making sure that the message is delivered, despite all the censorship and the attempts at stifling the debate and defaming, actually disfiguring our righteous struggle towards freedom and justice. And we notice, by the way, an increasing also a phenomena of new websites and smaller media outlets that are striving much more to report the truth and be neutral, which helps as well. So we need to push back, and I think there is a lot of pushing back here.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I want to ask you my next question, but alongside this, you mentioned Jenin. We saw the horrific scenes of what was happening in Jenin, but only on social media. I didn't get that coverage from mainstream media. So I'd like you to please just spend a few minutes telling us exactly what happened in Jenin. For those who are not clear, because how the mainstream media positions these things, but the legalities or the illegalities of what actually happened and how settlements were, kind of the refugee camp itself was invaded. And then I want to ask you this question. When we look at the blockade on Gaza, when we look at what happens in the West Bank in terms of what happened in Jenin and across the West Bank, and then the aftermath of these attacks, humanitarian aid is not allowed in, people are injured and dying, and especially in Gaza, they're not allowed to leave. The aftermath is where, there's real PTSD from a mental health condition, real physical ailments. People are literally left to die. And especially when they hit Gaza, the number one target of the Israeli occupation forces is hospitals, so that people cannot be treated. So my question is there any international government who can help and guarantee the safe passage of essential goods and aid to the West Bank and Gaza?
Yeah, okay. So that was the whole idea behind the many years of peace process, that would be key international partners, particularly the US, given its purchase with Israel and its leverage with Israel. We've just quoted some numbers, some striking numbers, that would do that would not allow the situation to fester into the current ugly reality. But unfortunately, and I don't want to spend much time details of this, the US is simply incapable to do it on its own. And for many reasons that we may discuss in a different occasion. But the legality of the situation is very well defined. I mean, the first act of aggression is military occupation and an invasion. So that's the origin of everything. And then an invading army, and think of Ukraine here, an invading army is committing acts of aggression. And every act it does is an act of aggression. And every act that the people that are being invaded or occupied is an act of self-defense. It's very clear within the international law, of course. And colonization, the colonial settlement expansion, is very well defined in the Fourth Geneva Convention as a war crime. It's a war crime because you having a military occupation on a territory does not allow you to change the demography and the nature of the territory or occupation you're occupying. Occupation is by definition a temporary thing. It's an interim thing, and there are governing bodies in the international system to make sure that occupying states abide by certain rules, provide protection for the civilian population under their occupation, etc. And that's why we have been wanting to refer Israel to international legal courts, the judicial system, the ICC and the ICJ, because it shouldn't be us who answer these questions. who's right and who's wrong. It should be international judges, should be international courts. Come and investigate. Come and investigate. And when I'm asked, I say, we will accept fully whatever verdict international courts will come up with, because we know international law is clear. It's absolutely clear. And that's exactly why Israel objects, blocks any of such attempts, and uses its allies like the US and UK to block us from such venues. So the legal situation is very clear. Why did we establish international system? We established it after the horrors of the Second World War on one main premise, which is the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force. That's the heart of it. But when you see countries like the US and the UK, the West in general, how they deal with the situation like in Ukraine, and when you see how they're dealing with situation like Palestine, it hits you, the double standards, the selectivity, And by the way, this is not only affecting Palestine, it's affecting the very image and the very legitimacy of the international system. And people wonder, for instance, many politicians here in the West ask us, why do you think the so-called global South is not as enthusiastic towards the war in Ukraine and helping Ukrainians? And my answer to them all the time is that because they see that the West applies all the tools of international law and quotes international law and go to the ICC and provides weapons to the people who are resisting the occupation and the annexation, when that is a situation of their enemies. But when it's their friends, the West go out of their way to protect and shield their friends against rules, global rules and international law. So that made mockery of international law. So your question is the right question at the right time, because if we lose, the UN system is not perfect. No one says it's perfect. It's the best we have. It's the best we have, and it has managed to keep some sort of um, international relations management based on rules, the rules-based international order. Now, if we lose that, it would be catastrophic. And I believe the way the West is dealing with Israel is going to be the thing that should or could severely undermine, if not completely undermine, the global-based order, the rules-based order. I mean.
Okay, thank you very much. On the issue of Your Excellency, internal Israeli politics, it's very clear. Everybody sees there's been a major shift in the political picture in Israel. Many are concerned about the increasing, let's call them, a radical far-right coalition under the current Netanyahu regime. And, first of all, how big of an obstacle is this? But by the same token, Your Excellency, could this also perhaps wake up the younger generation of Israelis that maybe are going to see this conflict differently than their grandparents did? What are your thoughts on this internal Israeli situation?
Well, I really wish, or I should have said, I hope your question is going to be materialized or will happen, that this new phenomena is going to really help bring an end to this insane situation. But regrettably, so far, we do not see that these hundreds of thousands in Israeli streets as we speak, they have managed to completely insulate themselves from the occupation and the colonization and the illegalities that are happening in Palestine. Complete insulation, and it's very strange, the decoupling. Of course, there is a very small group of them who, in every occasion, do call for the end of occupation. But I'm talking about the bulk, the mainstream, the main movement. They have managed to completely decouple what happens to them by their own government and what is happening to us in the occupied territories, which is so strange because this whole so-called judicial reform is being. I'm sorry, I have this strange cough since then. I think I have overused my cords. Now, this whole judicial reform is being primarily pushed by the settlement movement, the settlers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Why they're pushing for it? Because they think that the Israeli Supreme Court is the last remaining obstacle for them to completely and utterly colonize whatever left of the occupied territories and commit further crimes against humanity and war crimes. And by the way, I advise all of you to go and read what Bezalel Smotrich wrote a couple of years ago, a long, extensive article about his political and ideological thinking. It's very, very concerning. This is very serious. and now he is the overlord of the occupied territories. He is in charge. Netanyahu him in charge of the occupied territories. And the moment he became the overlord of the occupied territory, he completely changed the process of approval for the illegal settlements. So now it's on steroids. Now it's been, speed up. So why I'm saying all this? In fact, the whole judicial reform thing is the settler move turning against their own people, and therefore I hope that the Israeli public that are protesting against the so-called judicial reform are going to make the link very soon. Otherwise, their efforts will not be successful, nor ours. Now there is one key elephant in the room, and short of bringing that elephant to the fore and dealing with it, I think we will continue putting our heads under the sand, my friend.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Appreciate that. There's a lot of important insight in that. Thank you. I want to welcome another speaker to the stage, and she has a question for the ambassador, Shukri Abdi Rahman. She is a former U.S. Congress candidate from Minnesota. Go ahead, Shukri.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello, Ambassador, His Excellency. Thank you so much for your time. I just had a question about, in terms of international support from countries supporting Palestine. Mahmoud Abbas recently visited China. How do you see China's role going forward on the Palestinian issues? As you know, China has helped broker other conflicts, like bring Saudi and Iran together. Where do you see their role as far as China and Palestine?
Well, it's very positive that China is shouldering responsibility towards the region, and you've just quoted or mentioned the Chinese role in bringing Saudi Arabia and together. That should be welcomed. And the one lesson that we have learned over the last 30 years of failed, sorry, peace business. uh, Sorry, I was coughing it away. The one lesson was that the US cannot do it alone. Simple. There has to be a multilateral forum. The US's exclusion of others should end. And there has to be a more inclusive policy of bringing the world on the table to resolve this issue. This is a very serious issue. It has global repercussions and impacts, and therefore China has to be on the table and everyone else. And I have to say, China has been very principled when it comes to Palestine. It has recognized the state of Palestine minutes after the late Yasser Arafat pronounced the state on the 1967 borders. That was in 1988. And China continues to be a strong and firm proponent of international resolutions for Palestine and Israel. It has always voted with the international consensus. So we welcome the increased Chinese role in Middle East politics.
Thank you, Your Excellency. There's a question that I'm being sent in messages by people. Two people have sent this same question to me. What they're asking is, both of these people have said, what can we do? How can we help? The people who support Palestine, with all the challenges that you have mentioned, how can we help? What can we do? What more can we do?
Well, there is a lot to be done, really, and I am personally thinking more and more and reading more and more about the South Africa model and the anti-apartheid movement. The power of the people is huge, and I don't think we have used that to the maximum. And for the last so many years, we have been focused on a top-down approach, i.e., because of the peace processes and the many attempts and the many initiatives. Much of the time was spent with, senior government officials in the White House and in 10 Downing Street and here and there, Elysee and what have you. I think, now is a time when we have to change our strategy and focus more on a bottom up, on the people, on the bases. And as such, people can do a lot by way of writing letters to their representatives, and it makes a change. It makes a difference. And we see it when a parliamentarian in the UK receive letters about one issue, they pause and they reconsider. Sometimes when I get a phone call or an email from an MP here wanting to meet, I immediately know that he has received few letters on Palestine. So they want to appear, fair and neutral and engaging the Palestinian representatives. So writing letters is important. Also, addressing the issue of media. Whenever you see that there is bias, we need to take action. Making sure that we do not encourage illegality. So global activism and citizen activism is very important. Why should we consume illegal products that come from illegal settlements? And by the way, sometimes we need to take our lead from Israel's biggest and where they're. So whenever they are so scared about something, we should double down on it. And I think they are very scared. The most thing that really gets them is the ability of the international citizens to actually be ethical and apply the same rules on Israel like on everybody else. And they spend so much efforts and resources to make sure that Israel remains to be the exception and always above the law. And throughout the history of such issues, it is people like you actually bring about accountability. It's people like you. Look at it throughout history. And accountability can come in many shapes and forms. It doesn't have to be just in top, international courts. Accountability can come also through activism and through making sure that we push back. I can list many issues, but organization is very important. Organizing, because while we have the numbers, and I am certain we have the numbers, we don't have the equivalent organizations that the other side has. So we need to organize, and not just to be pro this or pro that or anti this and anti that, but to organize to make sure that our voice is delivered, and politicians realize that there will be a reward if they adopt the right approach, and there will be a punishment if they don't. Now, this is not the case with Palestine, unfortunately. It's the other way around. Politicians in the West, particularly, don't feel like they would lose anything or there will be any cost associated should they take the wrong position. And here comes your role, every one of you. Here, exactly. Because you're citizens of the US, of the UK, of any other country. Imagine if one politician realizes that they really were told off and they lost because of the wrong position they took. I'll tell you, a lot of calculations will change.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we have another question, but before that, from one of the speakers, I want to ask you a question that hopefully you can enlighten the audience on, because that they understand the situation in a place like Gaza, and what is the degree of the siege on Gaza? I'm talking about food supplies. Do they have control of their water, their electricity, telecommunications, airspace? What is the scale and the scope of the living conditions? If you can give us a picture of this, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And Gaza has been described rightly so as the biggest open air prison. I mean, I am from Gaza originally. I was born there, and whenever I have a chance, I go. And the situation is really a man-made catastrophe in every sense. And the numbers and the statistics is just striking. I mean, you have more than half of the population, more than half, are under the poverty line, and the unemployment rate is just unhuman. I mean, so the Gaza situation is particularly concerning, especially that also not only it has been besieged, blockaded for 16 years now, but every once in a while these F-16s and come and visit them, rather in a very unwelcomed way, and devastate the hell of the infrastructure, of neighborhoods, killing entire families. So yes, I don't think if you can compare the situation in Gaza to any other previous experience of a sustained brutality, oppression over such a long time, and it's just a man-made. It's not a natural disaster, or it's completely designed, a policy that has been adopted, and no one is able to challenge it. And many people think that this is in reaction to this group or that one. No, this is an Israeli plan that was done by Sharon to start the process of undermining any possibility of a two-state solution. Because if you physically separate Gaza from the rest of the West Bank, which they did, then you actually undermine the very idea of a Palestinian state. And that's why Israel is so adamant to keep the division and keep that physical, geographic disconnect and division, and also political division. And once in a while they just use the only option they have, which is violence against our people in Gaza. So it's very unfortunate, and it requires leadership because Gaza has a very huge potential. It's on a Mediterranean shore, as you know. It borders Egypt. It borders Israel as well. It's only very short distance to Europe because Cyprus is very close by. Gaza has gas on its shores, and Gaza has the most important of all the above, or more important than all the above, which is its human resources. Only yesterday, I received a delegation of very young scholars is a big word, but young students from a Gaza school who came here for an exchange program at Cambridge. And I was so impressed. I mean, despite what I've just described, still the human capital is so strong. Still the investment in education is really noticeable in Gaza and respected in Gaza. So you can transfer Gaza in a very short period of time should you have the sufficient political will. And Israel is crazy to think that by besiegement and by F-16 and 35, it resolved the issue. You've got 2 million people. You blockade them, you besiege them, you do not allow them to move, and then you bombard them once in a while, and you think they will sit still? They will not. This is the normal human being. This is how anybody would react. So of course human beings will start thinking, how do they get away with this? How they break away from it. So the best solution is to think about Gaza as part of Palestine. So stop with this Israeli fantasy that it will be severed, carved away from the rest of Palestine. This will not happen because every single Palestinian in Gaza only define themselves as Palestinians, and they want to be part of a Palestinian state. And by the way, that's why Gaza has been attacked by Israel, because Gaza is the engine of Palestinian nationalism, because Gaza's identity is so clear that towards a Palestinian national entity that is a state. So we are discussing this with many of our international partners, saying that Gaza could become the biggest asset we have. And I hope, I think just, I shouldn't go much more about that. But there is a deafening lack of international leadership as we speak. If we have good international leadership, I'll tell you, you'll be surprised that Gaza would become such a model. But it's unfortunate. Everybody is just taking the Israeli line, and everybody is focused on small matters, when in fact the bigger matters could be much more promising.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll take one question from this young Palestinian activist who's joined us, Yunus. Yunus, can you hear us?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much for joining. Very good, thank you. Go ahead with your question for the ambassador.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You're one of my favorite ambassadors for the Palestinians for decades. So thank you for being on the space. I want to touch on a very sensitive question, and I don't know if you want to speak about this. It's the kind of big elephant in the room that we Palestinians have. I'm a Palestinian, you're Palestinian. We speak about the internal political situation just in 1 minute or two.
Oh, sorry, Yunus. I want to really focus on the Israeli international issue on this. Hopefully, we will talk about internal issues.
I was going to mention about because he mentioned one very important word, which was the leadership. And I was saying, do you think, as an ambassador, that the Palestinian position and leadership is unified from within to interact with international partners?
But Yunus, that's my point. Sorry, I'm just going to stop you there. Thank you so much for joining us. But here's the thing. I will answer this for you from my perspective. And I asked the ambassador to come here. The reason I asked the ambassador to join us was because recently the attacks on Gaza and Jenin and what happened in Ramadan was so horrific. And Israel's atrocities were so horrific. And I followed the ambassador on the mainstream news here in the UK. Patrick is an American journalist, but he also lives in the UK. And we held a lot of spaces on it. And we were astounded that it really wasn't being covered. And I want to raise awareness of what Israel is doing. Nobody else is accountable for what is happening there, but Israel and the people that are supporting Israel, which is my government, the United States government, and various other governments. So thank you, Yunus. But Ambassador, I'd like to ask you one last question, and I know that you are struggling with your voice. So after that, we will, I promise, let you go. But it's leading on from what I've just said. And a question we asked earlier about, the international support that's given to Israel. When I look at the United Nations, and people hold it as some flagship, beacon of justice, but then I see Israel has broken probably more United Nations resolutions than any other country in the world. There's resolution after resolution which says Palestinians have a right to defend themselves, yet the media refuses to acknowledge this. They're not signatory to the International Criminal Court. I feel like legally, what is there to hold Israel accountable?
What is there to hold Israel accountable? How do we hold it accountable, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, but these courts were established for that very purpose, to hold countries and states accountable. And they if they cannot take up their responsibilities, they should dissolve themselves. I mean, why did we establish the ICC, and why do we have an international court of justice with a huge budget? Why do we have all these very renowned international judges and and prosecutors for this purpose, for accountability? And then you have the ICC to attach personal accountability, i.e., it goes after individuals, because ICC is about the role of each politician or army officer or soldier to investigate war crimes. But then the ICJ, on the other hand, looks at the overall legal assessment and situation and people's rights and wrongs and all that. So accountability could happen via that route. Accountability could happen via the route of the governments, i.e., governments like the UK must ban the illegal settlement products from reaching the UK markets. This is a basic thing, Kahlissee. It's a basic thing. They should ban the companies, British companies, from profiting illegally from these illegal colonies. And they are illegal not according to us. They are illegal according to the UK policy. Every morning you'll have a UK minister saying in the parliament or in official statements that settlements are illegal. Fine, good that this is your policy. But that policy requires action. And short of that action, then it's hollow words, it's lip service. So consequences could be created through these governments. Do settlers, illegal settlers who live illegally extraterritorially, have the right to travel to the UK without a visa? These questions need to be answered by UK politicians and government representatives. And the list goes on. We just discussed arms trade. I mean, why don't you apply your own rules on the trade, the arms trades with Israel? So accountability also could be created via governments. I said the first tier was international institutions. The second tier is various bilateral governments, i.e., the UK, the US, on their own, and the third layer is the people. And frankly, after some experience, I think we have got to keep pressuring the international system, to keep pressuring the countries and the states and the governments, but to work much more with you and with the people to try and change this very ugly reality. Because in the end, and I say it from my heart, Palestine is not just about Palestinians and for Palestinians. It is, and it is not a divide, by the way. It is not a divide between left and right. People think, oh, Palestine is an issue for the left. That's not true. Palestine is a divide between right and wrong. And Palestine is an issue that has to do with the way we want to manage this world, and we need to leave this world behind for our children and grandchildren. And I think it's a litmus test that has gone on for a long time. and that's why I think what you're doing now, Kahlissee, and all of your colleagues and friends, educating the people is very important. But allow me to answer my good friend Yunus. I don't know him, but he asked, and I don't mind answering him. He's my favorite Yunus as well. That the international community should deal with what government in Palestine, and that there is a confusion about the unity of Palestinians and the division of Palestinians. It's an important question that I need to address in 1 minute, perhaps, because I am definitely fastly losing my voice. You see, the people think that it's the PA that represents the Palestinian people. No, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was established by the PLO to take our responsibility under an interim agreement that is Oslo for a certain period of time. The entity, the umbrella that represents all Palestinians is the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. The office here.
Did we lose the ambassador?
Yeah, I think we did. I can't hear him either.
Yeah, well, wait a minute. It might be a connection issue. Let's see.
Ambassador, we're unable to hear you.
And more democratic renewal and what have you, that is absolutely legitimate. But the PLO is our representative, and therefore the world knows that they have a counterpart, they have a leadership to engage, and that is the rest of it is an internal Palestinian matter. All the other issues, but the world has an address. We have an address, and by the way, for your information, Yunus, even factions like Hamas say that the PLO has the legitimacy to represent us and to negotiate on our behalf, but they should offer whatever final outcome to a referendum, which is fair enough. So it's not contested, the PLO representation. The problem is neither Israel nor its allies want to deal with this. So because they are not intending to spend any political capital on creating a state and on actually achieving a final agreement, they export the issues. So one day they tell you it's the Palestinian violence and all that. Then they tell you it's because Palestinians are not united and we don't know who do we talk to. It's all pretexts, all trying to dodge, like the Abraham Accords, to dodge, to conflate, to deviate from the main issues. Anything but the main issue. I assure you, we have an address. People can talk to us, and we represent the Palestinian people in the best way we can. And the PLO remains to be the umbrella for all of that. Yet, your generation need to make sure that the PLO is also, democratic, and we convene the democratic process as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. The reason I jumped in at that question is because let's just say there was only one democratically elected representation for Palestinians and it was perfect and it was the perfect model. I don't believe it would change anything in the status quo as to what Israel is doing right now.
Of course. We
So,
had Yasser Arafat,
so
and we never had a division until recently, and Israel still went, besieged them, and killed them live on camera. So
which is why somebody's commented, why did the host shut that question down? So you are the person who's asked the question. You are an expert in Palestinian issues. You should know this. That everybody's focusing anywhere but on Israel, and this space is actually to focus on Israel and what Israel is doing, because none of these other idle kind of talking points is going to the reality of what Israel is doing, and that's what we want to draw attention to. I'd like to thank you very much for coming today, Your Excellency. It was a real honor and a real privilege for all of us to have you here. I know you haven't been feeling very well, and despite that, you have come here to speak to us. You didn't know any of us before today. You've spoken in such a candid way that we've all learned an enormous amount. I know I have. To take away from this and to really think about how to move this forward even more than we did before. I'd like to ask my co-host Patrick if he'd like to do any closing comments. We will let you go. We will keep the space running. I know there are a lot of people requesting the mic. We will bring you up once the ambassador takes leave. But I think it's only fair to let him take leave, given that we've completely exhausted his voice at the moment. But Patrick, any closing comments from you?
No, not anything other than we just thank you very much, Ambassador. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and especially with everything that's going on in Palestine, in the world, it's been an invaluable experience. And I'm sure for everybody listening, I can speak on their behalf, that they're better informed, I think, on this issue going forward. And we hope that we can keep this conversation going as things develop. And we definitely will look to and very much respect your viewpoints and your insights on these issues. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kahlissee. And by the way, this is my very first experience with Space, so I'm glad it was with you and with the Inspiring Group.
We're honored that it was with us, Ambassador. And I'd like to thank your office, Nina and Ahmed, who've really helped over the last few weeks for us to be able to arrange this, and they made it very easy for us. So I'm really grateful for their time as well on this. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, that was awesome. Patrick, should we finish this and start a new space, or should we keep this running?
I think we should. There might be some questions that we can field, and maybe a couple more questions. Please, maybe can we take some hands of the speakers that are up? We might bring one or two up. We have a few minutes left. Let's carry on with the conversation. If you have something to add to what's been said, especially. That would also be great. But let me see. I might bring Eva up possibly because I know that she's been waiting for a while.
I can't see any mic requests, Patrick, so I'm leaving this blindly to you.
Okay, no problem. Yep. Yeah, let me invite Eve up to the front there. She's requested. Let me see. We might have one other. We had some other journalists that we invited. Unfortunately, they were unavailable to make it. But yes, no, I was. I thought he was very candid. I appreciate his informal. He's definitely very informal, incredibly fluent on the issues. And also, I was very impressed with his geopolitical perspectives. And I think this is really important. That's one thing that has changed in this conversation, as you've seen. I think he's of the new crop of diplomats. The ones that I knew and saw and listened to, and were back in the 1990s. So this is another generation. We're very close in age. And see, there's definitely a wider global geopolitical perspective on things, and I think this is important because this is how the machinery of the world and the international system works. So I'm hoping that's going to bode well going forward.
I agree, Patrick. I was so impressed with the ambassador. Honestly, I've seen him on mainstream media here, and I feel it. Okay, so I'm not knocking my American friends here, but when I listen to your ambassador here, I feel like somebody's reading a script. There's no passion, delivering the message we've been told to give, and that's about it. When I hear, the Palestinian ambassador, when I see him on mainstream media, I feel like it's a cause that's important to him. It's a humanitarian cause that he's speaking about, and it's not just the formalities of being an ambassador and ticking boxes. So much passion, so much candidness. I was so impressed with him, and the fact that he was obviously under the weather. He was coughing a lot, but he still wanted to be here with us. I'm really honored.
I'd love to have him back with a focus on the American audience, given his obvious attention to the American influence in the Middle East and Palestine.
Democratic renewal and what have you, that is absolutely legitimate. But the PLO is our representative, and therefore the world knows that they have a counterpart, they have a leadership to engage, and that is the rest of it is an internal Palestinian matter. All the other issues, but the world has an address. We have an address, and by the way, for your information, Yunus, even factions like Hamas say that the PLO has the legitimacy to represent us and to negotiate on our behalf, but they should offer whatever final outcome to a referendum, which is fair enough. So it's not contested, the PLO representation. The problem is neither Israel nor its allies want to deal with this. So because they are not intending to spend any political capital on creating a state and on actually achieving a final agreement, they export the issues. So one day they tell you it's the Palestinian violence and all that. Then they tell you it's because Palestinians are not united and we don't know who do we talk to. It's all pretexts, all trying to dodge, like the Abraham Accords, to dodge, to conflate, to deviate from the main issues. Anything but the main issue. I assure you, we have an address. People can talk to us, and we represent the Palestinian people in the best way we can. And the PLO remains to be the umbrella for all of that. Yet, your generation need to make sure that the PLO is also, democratic, and we convene the democratic process as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. The reason I jumped in at that question is because let's just say there was only one democratically elected representation for Palestinians and it was perfect and it was a perfect model. I don't believe it would change anything in the status quo as to what Israel is doing right now.
We had Yasser Arafat, and we never had a division until recently, and Israel still went, besieged them, and killed them live on camera.
Which is why because somebody's commented, why did the host shut that question down? So you are the person who's asked the question. You are an expert in Palestinian issues. You should know this. That everybody's focusing anywhere but on Israel, and this space is actually to focus on Israel and what Israel is doing, because none of these other idle kind of talking points is going to the reality of what Israel is doing, and that's what we want to draw attention to. I'd like to thank you very much for coming today, Your Excellency. It was a real honor and a real privilege for all of us to have you here. I know you haven't been feeling very well, and despite that, you have come here to speak to us. You didn't know any of us before today. You've spoken in such a candid way that we've all learned an enormous amount. I know I have. to take away from this and to really think about how to move this forward even more than we did before. I'd like to ask my co-host Patrick if he'd like to do any closing comments. We will let you go. We will keep the space running. I know there are a lot of people requesting the mic. We will bring you up once the ambassador takes leave. But I think it's only fair to let him take leave, given that we've completely exhausted his voice at the moment. But Patrick, any closing comments from you?
No, not anything other than we just thank you very much, Ambassador. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and especially with everything that's going on in Palestine, in the world, it's been an invaluable experience. And I'm sure for everybody listening, I can speak on their behalf, that they're better informed, I think, on this issue going forward. And we hope that we can keep this conversation going as things develop. And we definitely will look to and very much respect your viewpoints and your insights on these issues. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kahlissee. And by the way, this is my very first experience with Space, so I'm glad it was with you and with the sparring group.
We're honored that it was with us, Ambassador. And I'd like to thank your office, Nina and Ahmed, who've really helped over the last few weeks for us to be able to arrange this, and they made it very easy for us. So I'm really grateful for their time as well on this. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you all. Goodbye.